So yesterday we explored experience. There was a whole series of explanations and then a looking at what experience is, and a suggestion that all of life is an experience, whether it's a experience that arises and is constructed in a way where there is duality, or if the experience changes and it's what we would call oneness. They are two different types of experience, both arising within consciousness, or experience can't exist without consciousness or awareness. And sometimes we get carried away with the idea that we need the experience to change from one of duality to oneness. Maybe even thinking that is liberation. That is the shift that we are waiting for. And if those peak experiences happen, which very much do happen, especially when we are immersed in descriptions of life as a non-duality, descriptions that talk about the end of separation. When a shift happens and the sense of who we are changes, because within the experience, the sense of self is very different. No longer feels like the body is aware, but rather that awareness is aware of everything, including the body, as part of the experience. When that happens, it's so profoundly different from what we're used to that it's very easy for us to conclude, that's what the mystics are talking about. And it happened. Often it fades away, and then we're waiting for it to come back with full force at some point when the process is finished, such that it no longer falls away. That becomes the expectation of the seeker. It's an expectation because it is a belief that that is what the process is about. It's a belief that that is what enlightenment is. So what happens is we end up with, according to this teaching framework, an incorrect expectation, an incorrect understanding about liberation. And essentially we become attached to the outcome of oneness, frustrated at times when it's not there, entering into meditations, wanting to become stiller and stiller, so that a stillness that we've never managed, that hasn't happened, one day happens, and we expect a sort of lightning bolt type event to happen when we're in meditation, whereby we will know the source, or we will know the oneness of the universe, or something. And that becomes one of the new forms of suffering that's extremely common amongst Advaita, non-duality seeking. Understandably so. Because in order for certain changes to happen, teachings need to put forward certain descriptions to disrupt the way that we see life. And so in the exploration yesterday, there was a pointing to the awareness that when we allow the experience to arise as it is, and there is just an allowing and a witnessing, the awareness that is always here can become noticeable. And if we start looking at life more and more regularly as a spontaneous arising, with a soft gaze, an open panoramic view, allowing the trees to move, the cars to move through, other people to be there. Hopefully even a witnessing of the body moving, this body moving, as part of the overall movement of this very dynamic experience. And allowing everything to be as it is, and a witnessing it. Something is aware of the experience. And so if certain faculties of thought get quietened down, faculties of judgment, of labeling, then the separation that is created by that judging, this is good and that is bad, this is appropriate, that is inappropriate, that judging quietens down, and then what we see is the all-inclusive experience of life. And that tends to allow dropping into what we could say is an aspect of self, the awareness, the witnessing aspect of self, that is really always present, is always that which is aware of the life experience, but from a different perspective. And that perspective is a perspective where the thinking mind tends to be less needed or less active. And you can do that anywhere, anytime. And when I say you can do it, really, it's much more about understanding that there's another gear in which life can be seen from. And that gear is much more passive in terms of its viewing of life. It's not interested in trying to change life, just interested in the amazing creation. So sitting at a cafe and dropping back into this sort of soft gaze and allowing yourself to see the whole panoramic experience, and then maybe that awareness even steps back to allow the body to be just an object and a sense that the witnessing isn't happening from the body. That when it becomes something that we feel like doing, something that happens regularly, is a forging of a path back to the heart, you could say, a forging of the path back to a connection of self that has been forgotten. Now, for some people, this has become first nature, not even second nature, first nature, because the way of relating to life that interferes with that witnessing, not the witnessing of the person, but just witnessing happening. Not the witnessing of a separate subject looking at separate objects, but where the object and subject essentially merge so that there is just life happening and an awareness of life happening. For some people, that's become first nature because the thinking and some of the other functioning of the body that interferes with that have been overcome in a way. And for others, that functioning still is deeply ingrained and believed to be what needs to happen in order for life to be maintained, for order to be maintained, for things to be the best that they can be. You know, a belief that I have to, judge the circumstance and try and ensure that I get the best outcome out of the circumstance, which includes a judging of things I don't like, because we think that that judging is somehow beneficial to us, to our life. It turns out that that judging has a very particular effect, but it's not really an effect that is useful if we have the benchmark of peace of mind in mind. If your benchmark is, I would like to feel as uncomfortable as I can in life, then that judging is really good, relative to the benchmark, to the objective of feeling uncomfortable in life, feeling isolated in life, feeling like you're in competition and rivalry with the other, where the other can take your completeness away at any moment. That's really the effect that it delivers. But that judging isn't something that we're doing because we can choose to judge or not judge. It's rather the way the human being has been designed and is functioning. So what I'm putting forward is not a set of prescriptions for you to achieve. That very judging dynamic, which in this teaching is referred to as attachment to outcome and the belief in personal doership, will hear the words as if it's a prescription, as if I'm telling someone that has the capacity to go out and control how they feel and how they see life and to change. And that's how it will be heard if a certain makeup is in place. Just being exposed to this new conditioning, which delivers new information to a very intelligent system. Our system is very intelligent. Just being exposed to information like this and in other satsangs is enough to make the change if that's what's destined. Right? You don't need to go and do it. You don't have homework to do when you leave. In fact, if you feel like you've got homework, then the point hasn't really sunk in. That we're not doing life, life is doing us. We're being lived. And so if suffering arises, it's because it's our destiny to suffer in that moment. And the resistance of the suffering is just more suffering on top of the suffering. Why is it our destiny? Because life has designed us, has created the biological and psychological entity in a particular way, and that's the outcome. That's the fruit of the human structure at the moment. And I'm talking in general terms, but you can look at your own makeup and look at how you feel and how you react and and what your attitude is to life, and know that that's just the output of a biological instrument created by life. That recognition or that description, right? So when I say recognize it, it sounds like I'm telling someone to do something. It's a description, and the seeing of it will happen or it won't happen. It's not particularly complicated. The description that I'm putting forward is saying that when you feel something, when you think something, when you talk to someone a certain way or respond to a situation, that's the output of a very complex biological, psychological instrument. Where it gets complicated is that especially the psychological part of the human being believes itself to be an independent entity in complete control, the doer of life. It just doesn't recognize that it is a biological machine. And so to certain psychological structures, this description is completely unpalatable. the sinking in of this notion is hugely liberated if it gets past the psychological entity that believes it's the doer, who, might resist it. If it gets past the mind that is fixated with trying to understand it on the level of the mind, and it sinks in where there is a surrender to the description that says, is this true? Or is it accurate? So the description is saying each of us is a uniquely designed instrument, functioning in each moment exactly the way that it's designed to function. And we, each of us, none of us, controlled how we were designed and how life, moment to moment, adds to that structure through the new conditioning that is delivered in each moment. The genes, which is the blueprint, the sperm and the egg come together, and then the instrument starts growing, and we are a result of that growth. And all of the new conditioning that is delivered moment after moment after moment, that becomes one with the genetic structure. Those two factors are never in our control. And so that's, to me, that's a simple description in terms of, intellectual complexity. It's not that complex. We don't actually need to understand genetic engineering. It's a general, we just need to understand the general principle. And a realization of this is a surrender to God's will. Thy will be done is the basis of all of the major religions. And at the core of the religions, when they're not taken as dogma and taken as control mechanisms, there's wisdom. So, inshallah, in Islam, thy will be done in Christianity. In the Bhagavad Gita, thou art the speaker, thou art the listener. Right? So, the thy will be done in an even more profound description. Life is a creation, and we are part of that creation. That creation we can call destiny unfolding. If we look at the suffering that arises in the human life experience, the suffering is guilt, blame, and pride. That's one half. And the other half is anxiety and worry, expectation and attachment to outcomes. So if you look at the first half of human suffering, and before I talk about the human suffering, in this framework, there's an encouragement to ask a question. That's a very important question. If you find yourself seeking, say, what am I really seeking? Let me be clear on what I'm seeking. And the suggestion is that we're looking for something practical. The outcome has to be something practical. If it doesn't deliver something practical, what's the point? We very easily our thinking makes the mistake of hearing something like the end of separation, enlightenment, and enlightenment is, the highest achievement, or, the pinnacle of the spiritual quest, 1 in a million or 1 in 10 million or whatever these things. And so then we say, oh, that's what I'm after, or it's described as truth. And our intellect that is attached to outcomes hears these things and says, oh, truth, oh, of course, that's what I want truth. Why do you want truth? What will truth give you? Why do you want oneness? What will oneness give you? And someone would say to me, well, it's not about getting anything, it's about, truth. Or reality. And so we have descriptions of the end of ignorance and seeing what is. So then that's what I want. I want the end of ignorance and seeing why. And if we don't ask ourselves this question, which means practically speaking, right, what are we really looking for? And it doesn't need to be a concept that we come up with. We just, in time, we'll get the answer. So I'll suggest the answer, so if you come up with another answer, my suggestion is keep trying till you come up with the answer that I'm suggesting. It happens to be, if you read in between the lines of all the scriptures and the spiritual teachings, if you hear them in the full context, and you don't just pick one paragraph that you like the sound of, and you'll see that, when it says oneness, that's part of the overall change. And if we start seeing it more clearly, we realize that the answer that I'm going to suggest is what's in the teachings, in a practical sense. What are you really looking for? We're looking for happiness. Human beings are all looking for happiness. The problem is that we've concluded that happiness is to be found in outcomes, in pleasure, in feeling good, in more. And that's pointing in if we're saying, I'm looking for happiness, humanity has stuck a big neon sign saying happiness in this direction, and it's pointing in the direction of outcomes and pleasure. And everyone has said, yes, of course, that's the best I know in life, is that less pain and more pleasure. And so we've bought in, it's become part of our deeply ingrained psyche. And so when the word happiness is suggested, we automatically think of something feeling good, like excitement. And the suggestion is that actually the happiness that is available is happiness through peace of mind. Unbroken peace of mind. So when I say happiness, I'm not talking about a happy feeling. Oh, I'm so happy to see you. You can still use the word that way. It's good if you don't for a while, just to start. But in the end, I still say, oh, I'm so happy to see you. But really what I mean is I'm pleased to see you. That's pleasure. When I talk about happiness, I'm talking about an equanimity. Finding oneself in life, experiencing the flow of life, and finding an inner equanimity. And a better word, a more practical word, is peace of mind, regardless of the circumstance, regardless of what is happening, regardless of what the outcomes are. Sometimes pleasure and sometimes pain. That's the happiness that's available, and when it sets in, it becomes so clear that I would have never found a lasting happiness by seeking pleasures. Life will deliver a pleasure, and it will get taken away. That's just the nature of the flow of life. And so it becomes known, I would never have found happiness in pleasure and the avoidance of pain. That's a futile exercise. And how simple it is that the happiness that is available in a sense of feeling content, but not as a feeling of contentment, essentially not having a narrative that says, I need more. And when pain comes, it's understood to be something that has to be endured, and it doesn't disturb our connection to self. And so the psychological stories about this shouldn't have happened, why did they do this, they shouldn't have done that, fall away. And it becomes completely understandable why someone steals things. It becomes completely understandable why someone becomes interested in something different in life and moves away from, let's say, a friendship or a relationship. It doesn't become pleasurable. Those pains remain painful. They're not in line with the biological preferences. And so the plane is delayed by 24 hours. It's still going to be annoying, but the story of, why did this happen? It falls away because we know that's life. So if the story were to start up, once an understanding starts going deep enough, something arises and says, that's life. And the story gets cut off. And then you find yourself waiting for your flight, but without the extra load of uncomfortableness that gets added on to the inevitable pleasures and pains. And when life delivers pleasure, you get to enjoy the pleasure fully without the story of when is this going to end? I don't want it to end, which essentially is an attack on enjoying the pleasure. And because the pleasure is, you know that the pleasure is just that pleasure and not a definition of who you are, it's not adding to who you are. When it gets taken away, when it stops, we don't feel like something is now missing. It's replaced by the next flow of life or the next content of the flow of life. So where do we rest when we drop out of the thinking, which is the first up? Guilt, blame, and pride. Guilt, a feeling of regret and resentment towards oneself for the actions that happened in life through you that delivered pain to yourself and to someone you love, or even a stranger. And that guilt, which manifests as a sense of shame, can stay with us for years in regard to something that happened as a result of the actions that happened through me that delivered pain to myself or someone I love. And blame is the same in principle, except it's resentment, hatred towards the other for what they did that delivered pain to us. And we say, you shouldn't have done that. I hate you for the pain that you delivered to me. And pride, once again, is the same principle, but in relation to outcomes that are not painful or negative, but that are pleasurable or positive. And we say, look what I have done. And that's the pride. And when we investigate the guilt, blame, and pride, the root on which they flower is the belief in personal doership. The idea that we're each separate independent entities in complete control of everything we think, say, feel, and do. And on that basis, if that's how we see ourselves and the other, then we say, I could have done it differently. I didn't do it differently, the outcome was bad, and therefore I have to hate myself because I feel like I've not functioned well enough. And because I'm in control, I could have functioned better. And that same attitude of personal doership is how we see the other, and when they deliver something to us, it's personal. you, as a separate independent entity that could have functioned much better, you should know better, have delivered pain to me and I hate you. So guilt, blame and pride, look what I have done, look what I've achieved, that's the attitude of pride based on personal doership in relation to the positive outcomes, are all based on this belief that I am the doer and the other is the doer. If we recognize that we're all biological instruments through which consciousness functions, and we're all functioning in each moment according to the circumstance we find ourselves in. We see something, we hear something, we smell something, we touch something, we taste something. And what it is that we hear, see, taste, touch, or smell is part of the environment. We're not in control of that. If a bird flies past or a monkey runs past, I see it, but I didn't control the monkey running past. And I couldn't avoid but see it. And as a result of my genes and up-to-date conditioning, that image creates an internal response of a very complex biological, psychological instrument. And a thought arises. Oh, wow, look, there's a monkey. I don't see those in my home. You know, that thought, which, you know, with this deeply ingrained belief of personal doership, is usually referred to as, that's my thought. I did that. And if there was an action of feeding a monkey and then we get bitten, for example, or there's a fight between two monkeys and we get scratched, then that was my action and I shouldn't have done that. I should have known better. Especially if someone else gets hurt, we feel, very responsible and shame. Because we're not recognizing that in the circumstance, this body-mind organism, based on what it saw, thought something, moved in a certain way, thinking that, this was going to be fine. And the outcome, which we're never in control of, in this case, wasn't fine. And so then the shame kicks in, rather than recognizing there's a very complex biological instrument, a circumstance, and an interaction with the circumstance leads to an automatic set of thinking, automatic set of actions, all of which are really outside of our control. Now, if there was an incident with the monkey, that incident becomes part of the new conditioning that life has delivered. So life has delivered new conditioning to us moment after moment after moment, and it makes up part of the structure that we are, the structure that responds and reacts in each circumstance. So if someone hasn't been exposed to monkeys, they think it's fine to feed them. They haven't had any new conditioning from life that becomes part of the up-to-date conditioning that says it's not such a great idea. Whereas after life has delivered the new conditioning of being bitten and having to go to hospital and get rabies shots and then go back 2 weeks later and get more rabies, that's new conditioning that life has delivered, but you weren't in control of that new conditioning. You didn't want to get bitten in the first place. You definitely didn't say, I'll get bitten in order to get this new conditioning. The getting bitten was a result of your up-to-date conditioning that you weren't in control of. Now, this might sound psychological, intellectual, might be, this isn't what spirituality is about. Spirituality is about being able to rest in peace. And what stops us doing that is the thinking mind that gets in the way of that. And the thinking mind is based on these deeply ingrained beliefs that I'm describing. And if our intellect never lands on this and starts to investigate it for ourselves, we remain ignorant seekers And it then is our destiny for the seeking to be prolonged. When life starts to deliver the conditioning that allows a seeing of the dynamics that get in the way of the peace of mind, it's quite possible that the seeking progresses quicker. So if it didn't have a direct link to peace of mind in daily living, this would all be, could be argued to be, it's not really about understanding intellectual concepts. Actually, freedom is an absence of the intellect. I'd say freedom is the absence of the thinking mind. And so if there is the absence of the thinking mind, then none of these descriptions are relevant. Because there's peace. Peace with the fact you got bitten by the monkey, because there's an understanding. This happened because of destiny. This happened because I found myself in a circumstance. We're always in circumstance in life. Life is circumstance. I saw something, I heard something, smelled something, touched something that was part of the circumstance. And the body moved, the body functioned according to its makeup. And I thought, based on my genes and up-to-date conditioning, that it was a good thing to feed the monkey. I got bitten because I wanted to keep some for the other monkey, and the big monkey didn't care much for that. So it bit me. And if that happened in the face of pain, in the face of circumstance that we can call painful circumstance, not in line with my biological preferences, a peace arises because there's no doubting myself, doubting life, no saying life should be different. It's understood. This was destiny, God's will. Why God's will? You can substitute the word God with source or with life. It was life's will because life made me this way, and life made the circumstance this way. Life put the monkey there. Life put me there. Life made me think and act that way, and life made the monkey act that way. All are happening according to life's will, not my will. Not even the monkey's will. How can I expect the monkey to act differently? It's a very complex biological instrument doing exactly what it's designed to do. No judgment of the monkey. That doesn't mean that I'll invite it in for dinner. But no hatred for it. And our reaction to life when the deeply ingrained belief of personal doership is there is radically different to one of acceptance. So all of this is a preamble to the exploration into dropping into I am, abiding in I am. Because just like the exercise we spoke of yesterday, which is to rest as often as it feels appropriate, as often as you feel like it, aware of life as a happening, meaning witnessing it all as a very detailed creation unfolding in front of you, looking at the intricacy of the plants and the birds and the people and the walls and the floor and an itch happening, and all of that is witnessed as part of the experience, part of the creation in this moment. The more that we can drop into that space, the less involved, psychologically involved we are in life. And the habit of involvement in life needs to be interrupted. And as it's interrupted, the new becomes more and more stabilized and the old gets weaker and weaker. And so the dropping into I am, dropping into beingness, is another movement that is almost synonymous with this witnessing we were talking about yesterday. And it starts to forge the path between the head and the heart. So Nisargadatta Maharaj put forward the teaching of I am, abide in I am. And he did that because his guru, Siddharameshwar Maharaj, told him, abide in I am. That's it. And Nisargadatta Maharaj was a bhakti. And so he had no reason to disobey or to question his guru's instruction. And he said after 4 years, the self was realized. There's no reason why it needs to take 4 years. It might take 20 years. How long it takes is destiny. It could be very quick. So what does abide in I am mean? Once again, it isn't a prescription for a doer to go and do. When some people start meditation practice, the doership is very strong, and so the meditation practice is engaged in as a practice by a doer that wants to do meditation well. Very rigid timing for the meditation. If they can sit in meditation for 50 minutes, that's an achievement. I feel good that I sat there for 50 minutes, whereas normally I can only do 35 minutes. And there is often in meditation a trying to get somewhere, trying to get an outcome. And so that's the doership, that eventually meditation will dissolve that entity doing. And then meditation will happen. Life is always happening, and there tends to be this doer claiming ownership and trying to make it happen a certain way. When that dissolves, then things are seen to always be happening. They always were just happening. So this description of a process, let's say, of abiding in I am is not something that you must do. But the description is new conditioning. The description becomes or doesn't part of your up-to-date conditioning. So you can be in the room, and it could be that your thinking is thinking about something else. You're wondering why I came here, and the new conditioning doesn't sink in. You could be thinking about those things I just mentioned, and it still sinks in. You could be completely interested and focused and it doesn't sink in. So whether the new conditioning sinks in or not in my control or your control. Life is always delivering new conditioning, and we're always changing. How we change because of the new conditioning? God's will, life's will, destiny, not in our control. So the description is there as a description, and then we might find that it starts happening simply because the organism has been changed, and it then functions differently. An example of this is if I were to show someone how to chop a piece of wood. That demonstration is new conditioning. And they weren't in control of the new conditioning that came in. I might have said, hey, I see you're chopping wood. Well, you think you're chopping wood, and that's not how you do it if you want to be safe. And so they didn't, they weren't in control of me offering the advice. Maybe they didn't want it and I offered it anyway. And then they're not, even if they asked me, can you help me chop wood? I've never done it before. Can you show me how to do it? They don't know what information I'm going to deliver. I might deliver really bad advice. So no one is ever in control of the new conditioning that comes in, and they're not in control of how it sinks in. So I give them the advice. I say, well, firstly, you want to stick the log on the flat ends facing up and down, not sideways like you're trying to do it, because the wood needs to split along the grain, and you're hitting it in line with the grain, so it has to be sitting that way. And a whole lot of it. So that's new conditioning. A week later, they're chopping wood, and they find that they're chopping wood, and they do it differently to before the instruction. And if you ask them, who chopped the wood? I chopped the wood. And it's true, the person chopped the wood, but not the person as the doer. Now the doer, this word doer, is referring to the fact that the chopping of the wood happened that way because life designed you the way you were, including your genetics and your up-to-date conditioning. And the instruction was part of the up-to-date conditioning, and how it was received was a result of their genetics and their previous up-to-date conditioning. If I speak English and they spoke Japanese, I could describe it, and it's going to be received probably different to someone who speaks English. So their genes and up-to-date conditioning are a factor of how the new conditioning is received. So when the person is chopping wood after life has delivered new conditioning, we believe that's my doing. Me as a separate independent entity, not recognizing that we are doing according to life's design, according to life's input. We've never been insulated from life. So the description about this abiding in I am is new conditioning if it becomes part of the system and we find ourselves functioning according to the practice of I am. Awareness might land on this and say, this is a happening according to God's will. The thinking that says, my happiness is not to be found in the flow of life, which is part of the description of this process of abiding in I am, that thought, my happiness isn't to be found is a happening. It's a spontaneous happening in the moment when awareness lands on the thinking mind that is obsessing about something that someone didn't do, pleasure or pain, part of the flow of life, and hating them for it, resenting them for it. And then the thought arises, my happiness isn't to be found in the flow of life. My happiness isn't to be found in whether they did it or they didn't do it. And that thought we refer to usually as my thought. We don't see it as a happening. according to God's will. That seeing of it that way, which means an explanation needs to be given as to why it is God's will or life's will and not my will. Because without that explanation, we'll continue to assess it as, well, that was my doing. I chopped the wood because I have control over how I chop the wood. I could have chopped it this way, or I could have chopped it side on. And I say, you couldn't have chopped it side on once you got told that chopping it side on is absolutely pointless. I could have flipped it sideways. Did you? Oh, in each moment you'll function one way, according to your genes and up-to-date conditioning. And so a description needs to be given, and if that description sits in, we can start to see all of the things that happen moment after moment, and start to, oh, actually, that is much less my doing than I previously thought, much more a happening according to my makeup. We start to see the others functioning as a happening according to their makeup. Much less hatred towards the other when this is seen deeply, much less hatred towards ourselves, much more compassion. Even when the other is delivering pain to us. It's understood. The pain is part of destiny, so it's my destiny for the pain to be delivered, and it's the destiny of the other, destiny of the monkey to bite me in order for the pain to be delivered. And the pain doesn't have to be just physical pain. It can be physical pain, it can be emotional pain, it can be financial pain. I go to get my wallet and I realize someone's taken my wallet out of my back pocket. That's financial pain in the moment. I had $100 in the wallet, now I have no $100. My biological preference is for my $100 to still be there. And it's destiny. It was my destiny to experience the financial pain, and that destiny had to happen by the other being the way they are and taking the money. So in Ramana's teaching, there is a quote. It's quite a long quote. I haven't said it for some time. Or incidentally, for those that were here yesterday, the quote that escaped me yesterday came to me this morning when I was sitting. There is no creation, there is no dissolution, nothing ever happened. So that was in relation to yesterday's talk. So moving on to this other quote in Ramana saying, everything in life happens according to the body's karma. Everything happens according to the great ordainer. Whatever is destined to happen, no matter what force in the universe tries to stop it from happening, it will still happen. Whatever is destined not to happen, no matter what force in the universe tries to stop it or tries to make it happen, it will not happen. When this is understood, the best course of action is to remain silent. The silence is the silence of the judging, thinking mind. The silence of saying how life should and shouldn't be. Witnessing all of life as a happening according to God's will. In non-duality, it's all there is Brahman. Everything is God. The manifestation is God. Source at rest, infinite creative potentiality, explodes into manifestation. Becomes the whole story of time, from the beginning of time to the end of time. everything that happens in between is a happening according to that creation. The human beings are all part of that creation. And at the end, Source returns to its potential form, the unmanifest. Now you can see that, if you like, in each moment. Source at rest becomes Source in manifestation, collapse back to Source at rest, remanifests, collapses back, and so on, each moment. Or you can look at time as a block, the beginning of time to the end of time. And Ramesh used to say, the story of life has been written, acted, directed, produced, and it's in the can. And what we get to see is what is in the can, what is destined in each moment. And with the attitude that it is all God, it is all Brahman, all Source playing itself out in the story of life, then what the other does to me is part of that story. And the attitude, it was my destiny as part of the story of life to experience pain in this moment. It was my destiny in the story of life to experience pleasure in this moment, if that's what it happens to be. And me and the other are the instruments through which the destined pleasure and pain are delivered. If it's destiny for the pleasure and pain to be experienced without the thinking mind active, then we have a peaceful life. Still a life of pleasure and pain. That is an inevitable characteristic, the nature, you could say, of the flow of life, the nature of circumstance. The best we can hope for is to find ourselves in non-resistance to that. And that essentially is a surrender to God's will. Not my will, thy will be done. So I'm just sure. Well,
do you mean like God as an outside source, or do you mean that part within?
It's just a placeholder name.
Yeah, because I keep getting, like I feel like I have a bit of resistance to, the word God, I guess.
Change it for source.
Yeah, or soul, maybe.
No,
but
source.
Source.
No, the thing that all of this came out of. So not soul, unless for you all of this came out of your soul. If that works, if that makes sense, and that this is not your doing, but your soul's doing, maybe, right? But not your doing. Whatever it is that allows you to understand this is a happening according to source, according to where it came from.
But then, how does free will get in or come in? Would you say? I think I asked you that last year, didn't I? Would you say there isn't any?
Well, when you're coming to look at it as I'm describing, that the whole story of life is a creation from the beginning of time to the end of time, with all of the natural disasters, all of the brutality in life, because humans are cruel and brutal historically, and hopefully in time that will change. If we start to see the whole thing as a creation that has to be that way because of the cosmic laws, right? So a creation according to cosmic laws, then while that's sinking in, you might as well have the attitude that there is no free will. It's
I think that's where I don't agree. But then, I
Mm.
think it's like
But-
different concepts.
sure, but the thing is, it's not so much. The teaching actually says in each moment you're completely free to do whatever you like. Right? So that's what I would call your free will. You are free to ask the question from a certain perspective. From the other perspective, I say you asked the question because I said something, you heard it, and according to your genes and up-to-date conditioning, that created a thought, and then it created a movement, and this interaction happened. And that's the same explanation that Ramana gave when he was talking about predetermination, and someone put up their hand and said, "Excuse me, Bhagwan, with all due respect, I have complete free will to raise my hand and ask this question." And Bhagwan responded, "Yes, from one perspective, you are free to raise your hand or not raise your hand. However, from another perspective, you raised your hand only because I was talking about free will. And based on your makeup, I was talking about predetermination. And based on your makeup, that talk about predetermination, which I was destined to talk about, inspired you to raise your hand and make the statement you made, which was all part of destiny."
Okay. Interesting concept. Yeah. It's just, yeah, I don't really think I can agree 100% with that, but I don't really have to, so it's interesting anyway.
It isn't actually about agreeing. What I would hope in the end is that someone says, "Is it true that my life gets disturbed when my attitude to the flow of life, my attitude to how the other functions, how I function, how circumstance unfold, is it true that my life experience gets disturbed and an extra layer of discomfort added to the circumstance when my attitude is one of guilt, blame and pride?"
But that would be more like resistance, wouldn't it? I mean, I'm pretty sure that this does not help anywhere, anyhow. But the free will, how I understand it, is I had the free will, the free choice to come to India. I mean, I could have stayed in wherever or gone somewhere else, but that is my free will.
Yeah. So if you go to your experience, so this is where we have to be particular. If you go to your experience and you say, "Let me put the theory aside and let me look at my experience." Thankfully, the fact that whatever we do in each moment according to the theory is predetermined and not our doing, right? That's what the theory says. I've just spent an hour putting out the theory.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Regardless of the fact that the theory paints a very compelling story, a very compelling argument of non-doership, because everything happens according to genes and up-to-date conditioning, the way you are, and you didn't design that. You didn't create it. Right?
But I do make choices. There is junctures.
Yeah, but those choices too are a result of the circumstance you find yourself in and the very complex thinking as part of your makeup. So what you say is my choice is a happening.
Okay, yeah.
So there are options. You open up the fridge and there's 6 items. We can't deny that a choice gets made. Your hand goes towards the orange juice and takes that out. However, that choice was a result of the circumstance, what is in the fridge, how you feel in the moment.
Yeah.
So neither of those things are in your control. And the very complex thinking process that happened when you saw what was in the fridge and assessed it relative to what you feel. Right? So what we call my choice actually is choice happening as part of a very complex biological and psychological entity. When we put the theory aside and we go to our experience, thankfully, that experience that I've described as a happening, as destiny unfolding, is experienced as free will. Doesn't mean it is free will. It means that thankfully, God's will unfolds in each moment by me doing what I feel like doing, which you can call your free will. So I say, I felt like taking the orange juice. So this is the paradox, which is the gift in life, because if that sense of free will, meaning the sense that I'm doing what I want because of my own volition, if that wasn't there, we would feel like prisoners, like slaves.
Powerless.
Yeah. And we don't. So when we go to the experience, we realize there's a magic here, is that everything is God's will, including the choices I make. And yet in the moment, those choices happen because of what we can call my free will, doing what I feel like. And so then we put the two together and we go, oh, so God's will and my free will are not two. God's will and my free will are two sides of the one coin. Which is great, because then you can, someone can say, so how should I live my life if life is completely predetermined? I said, in each moment, do exactly what you feel like doing, do exactly what you think like doing.
I can totally agree with that.
Yeah. But recognize that what you feel like doing and what you think you should or shouldn't do is actually God's will, manifesting as what you can call your free will. But if you have an issue with that, it's most likely something to investigate. It's a resistance to giving up this idea of free will. It's like, no, I'm not going to surrender to God's will. So it's worth investigating. Because if that's the case, that's the belief in personal doership. Sort of asserting its power, saying no, it's an interesting theory, but thank you very much, I have my free will. So the suggestion is, why does it not sit well?
I guess because it does make me feel powerless, and I can't really wrap my mind around it either, because, like, to give an example, I had this bill coming in, right? And I could just say, fuck it, not do anything. I did not have the money at that stage to pay for it. And I can go and sit on the phone and write emails and, make the effort to for them either to recede or to give me some more time or, borrow money from someone or whatever. But that I have to be doing that.
Yeah, so when that happens, because you feel like that's the best course of action, recognize that in someone else that has different makeup to you, that course of action may not happen through someone else. And so that course of action happened because of your genes and up-to-date conditioning. It was your parents or society or your experience in living life, and your own experience is new conditioning that has said, actually, I can contest this. And so the contesting in you, because your parents say, no, contest things, stand up for yourself. Or your experience says, I don't have money, and when I write to a utility company or whatever and say, I don't have money, can I have 6 months to pay it? They say yes. So then that's your experience. That's part of your genes and up-to-date conditioning. And so when a bill comes in and you don't have money, it's an automatic happening, if someone's never even heard about writing to a utility company, let alone receiving a letter back that says, sure, thanks for writing to us, we appreciate it, and you can have a payment plan. If someone's never heard about that, then the thought to do what you said is your free will just wouldn't occur to them.
But then the outcome might be pretty problematic, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah, and so once that problematic outcome happens, which it does for many people, the debt collector comes round, for example, or whatever, and the debt collector says to them, you can just write and ask for more time. That's life delivering new conditioning to you. So then next time for that person, they get the bill and they can't pay it, and what do? They write a letter. And they say, that's my free will, that I'm in control of that. And actually, if you look at it, it's because life has told you, through one way or the other, that that's what you can do. And so then you function that way.
Okay, yeah, I can relate to that, I guess.
So this actually, it's a psychological, the acceptance of what is being put forward. If there's a resistance to it, it's a psychological resistance, because recognizing it doesn't take anything away from you. It doesn't make you incompetent or impotent after that point. The recognition of the dynamic I'm speaking about doesn't then make you have to sit on a chair and not function. In fact, you'll continue to function more or less as you functioned previously, but with a recognition that my functioning is based on my genes and up-to-date conditioning that I didn't control. It doesn't change your functioning, it just allows you to see the functioning with a new attitude. The attitude of non-doership versus the previous attitude of doership. So it doesn't make you impotent. You continue to function the way you did previously on a biological level. However, the psychological suffering, the psychological resistance can diminish with this realization.
Yeah. Then
You only win, really.
Yeah, then you go like, oh yeah, whatever, it's all good, always.
Yes, hopefully people can sometimes take this as an excuse and become complacent. This, if you tell the utility company, it was all God's will for me not to pay, right? They'll say, fine, but it's God's will for you to, get a bad credit rating, for example. So it's all God's will is only relevant on the level of your attitude to the flow of life. You're on the level of your guilt or blame or pride or expectation, not on the level of your biological functioning.
Thank you.
Pleasure, thank you. Okay.
Have we moved into Q&A?
I still didn't do the abide and I am, but actually,
do you want to do abide and I am, and I wait with my question?
I don't. Yeah.
Assert that free will.
I'm very happy with the question.
What I'm finding is that the fruit of the teaching you're offering, the obstacles to my receiving it, are two metaphors that are being used repeatedly. Mm-hmm. And those metaphors are very heavy with meaning. Mm-hmm. One metaphor is mechanical materialism, that we are machines, that everything is a machine just functioning. The devastation of this world is a product of mechanical materialism. Mm-hmm. Yeah, nature is alive. We are all. I'm seeking a different metaphor for that. The metaphor and the other metaphor that I'm still seeking a different one for is destiny, because destiny is about linear time. It's about something being written That's what the word means to me. Something that was written long, long ago, and that is now unfolding. But quantum physics reveals to us that time doesn't exist, right? Our bodies need it, but time doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist on the quantum level. The mistake is if we take the quantum as being exclusively what is, whereas actually quantum and mechanical physics coexist. So the mistake is that we're all very used to mechanical physics, and then we get given quantum, and then we think, oh, that's the truth, and mechanical physics is not. It's a big in my mind, it's a big mistake. It's actually what happens in non-duality is we go to the theory, we get given a theory of oneness, let's say, and we start experiencing that because we can deconstruct life. It starts to deconstruct life, and we see something that wasn't seen before. And then we go, this is truth. And the other, which still exists on level, our attention is completely away from it. And so then we make the mistake of not being able to integrate what is, and what is this paradox of two dimensions. So I wouldn't say time doesn't exist. On the quantum level, time doesn't exist. But the flow of life, so in quantum mechanics, causality falls away. If we go around saying causality doesn't exist, we're missing what is right in front of us on a practical level. It's like, saying that chair is made of nothing. And then only seeing nothing, which you can't actually do. You can't see nothing. You can have a deep understanding and sort of project nothingness onto the chair. And that's what can happen, is we can understand the theory so well that in a way we stop being able to see the chair and we only see nothing. But actually if we get slapped around a little bit and say, let me throw nothing at you, right? We realize in practical terms the chair exists, not as nothing but as something. And so to me the notion of no causality, of no time, is one side of a coin. And because we're obsessed with the other side of the coin, because that's all that's available to us in terms of experience, we don't understand this side of the coin. So teachings are really trying to say, hey, there's another side of the coin, but they know that you're obsessed with this side of the coin. So what do? They say, that's illusion. That's unreal. That's not truth. And so that's great. So it appeals to our thing and says, I don't want that. And then it says, I'll tell you what the absolute is, what truth is, what reality is. It is, and then it starts describing everything that this isn't, right? So it says that's illusion. Form is illusion. Form is transitory. So it will undermine this, which in effect at some point allows us for this to happen. And we see the other side. Of course. And then we become obsessed with this side and forget that this side exists. So in practical terms, we have to live our life as if all of this is real, as if time exists, as if causality exists, and not even pretending.
And as if there's a doer.
And as if, exactly. And when I say as if, it's not pretending. It's like, as if really means on a biological level, my biological instrument knows if I want the light in the room, I have to turn the switch on. And if I want hot water for my tea, I have to turn the kettle on. And if I want to get somewhere in the non-existent future, I need to book a ticket that on it says the non-existent future date. And so, I listened to a teacher once who was talking about the non-existence of time and space, and I happened to be in the space of that teacher. And now, don't get me wrong, I understand teachings as teachings. So I have no problem with a teaching that says there's no time and space. I'll say it often, if I think it's appropriate for whatever's needed. So that whole satsang was on that. And then the satsang finished, the camera was over, and someone said, when is it that you're coming to Canada? Oh, I'm coming to Canada in August. So the whole talk is about how there's no there's only now, there's only here, causality does exist, time doesn't exist. As soon as the satsang's over, when are you coming to Canada, which is not where they were, Canada's over there, some theoretical Canada. And the automatic response, I'm coming to Canada, which is over there, in August, 2 months' time. Now, I'm not criticizing them for saying that. That's how you live life practically. You don't live life as if time and space don't exist on a practical level. I hope I didn't ruin the question, though.
Actually, I didn't get to it. That's okay.
Okay.
But the question then is a very practical one. All that exists is this moment. And I can do in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
In this moment, I can rush home to the hospital side of a dying friend. In this moment, I can pressure my university to divest from carbon economies and mourn the victims of the Ukrainian flight. And I can act in many ways in this moment. And I guess if we call what I'm seeking peace of mind is I want to act in ways that guide me. So I guess I'm wondering, how does the framework guide me in acting in ways?
It really doesn't.
Uh-huh.
No, because the framework says, it doesn't say, it says you can act however you like, and that is destiny. So the fact that it's, because sometimes we hear destiny and we say, it's fixed, and therefore nothing can change. And so, but it's not so much that, what it's saying is that the change that happens in each moment is the destiny. So if someone's moving in a certain direction and suddenly they say, no, I want to go this way, it was destined for that change to happen. So destiny doesn't say there isn't change, it says the change is destined. And then it requires the individuals to function on the one hand according to destiny, and on the other hand, we've discussed that destiny or God's will unfolds through each of us doing in each moment whatever we think or feel to do. So the framework says you're completely free to do whatever you think or feel to do. And you will do, everyone is always doing what they think or feel to do. And what someone does according to what they think or feel to do is based on their genes and up-to-date conditioning. So if your up-to-date conditioning includes a priority towards the planet, for example, that's destiny, according to this framework. You are destined to be shaped by life for that to be your priority, which means in a particular circumstance, you're destined to function a particular way, which is to say something if you feel that that's going to make a difference, as opposed to someone else who doesn't have that priority, isn't interested in using their energy in making that stance. And so someone else who's designed differently will do something different. So the framework is saying it's much less about the framework isn't trying to get people to be better people. In fact, what it's saying is if a person insists on them being a particular way, better, they're going to create, there's going to be an internal resistance if they fail to be better. So shame, guilt and shame. And that attitude of doership and attachment to outcome. So attachment to outcome means I'm attached to being better. Outcome is I'm attached to delivering better outcomes. And I can do it. I can make myself better. The framework is saying, actually, you will be only one way in each moment, right? Which might be very good, but it's one way. And that way is the way that life has shaped you, which includes all of your contemplation, all of your assessing the situation. It includes the thought that says, actually, what's most important to me is the environment. So the framework is saying you are environmentally conscientious because of your genetic structure and your up-to-date conditioning, which includes your own thinking and the feedback of that thinking. But it says if you insist on yourself being different to that, then there's a misalignment on the psychological level with the actual practical capacity of you as a biological entity. If you don't insist, but you just say, I would like to be better, that's but you're not attached to the outcome. So you say, I would like to be better, but let's see. Not let's see, I'd like to be better and now I'm just going to lie on the beach. It's I'd like to be better, and if there's a movement that gets you to go to some education because of the I'd like to be better, then you can see that as a happening. But it's about a looseness with the outcomes, which doesn't mean a complacency. So the teaching says, do your best. In each moment, do your best. But don't be attached to the outcome, because the outcomes are not in your control. And we see that everywhere in wisdom teachings. It's, sow the crops, but the fruits are not your doing. So you have to do your best, but then hand it over to God, in a sense, which really is talking about this attitude of non-doership. And furthermore, if you say, I want to be the best, then you're going to sort of have, and it's a psychological attachment, then when you see someone being really rubbish in life, relative to your standards, relative to your preferences, what has to happen is you have to judge them. You don't give them the freedom to be who they are. And what that does is it creates an uncomfortableness with oneself, a resistance to life, because we're in resistance to what is. So take politicians. We see the politician, they put out policy that is not in line with that, and we hate them for it. Really, there's no simpler way than saying there's a huge amount of hatred to the politicians that deliver policy that don't deliver outcomes that we like. Instead of seeing them as part and parcel of this life creation. Now that doesn't mean that you have to agree with them. It doesn't mean you don't go to rallies, but to me an activist that is an activist not attached to outcomes can be super diligent, can do more than any other activist, but they're at peace because they know I've done what I can, but the outcome is not in my control. I've done everything I can, but it's not necessarily going to stop that legislation. So.
And I think one of the ways that that's making sense for me is that if my sense of an individual autonomous doer and who has free will is resulting in my saying no to what comes up, as opposed to saying yes to every single thing that happens, then I can't engage. It's only in saying yes to everything that I can engage. My no is not just creating suffering, it's actually resulting in my engaging with my own perception and not seeing truth, I guess. And if I can understand that everything exists without time, everything exists, I'm going to play with that, then seeing allows me to trace a time trajectory in that, or not, but it allows me to see. That's how it's making sense for me.
Makes sense. So, in conclusion, I'll go back to this notion about how because we interpret a word like predetermination, especially because it has this pre-component, this word pre, meaning before, so we sort of take it based on causality, before. Whereas from a quantum physics point of view, it's what it is saying is it spontaneously happened the whole of time, which really means no time. In no time, the whole of time arose. So the time is contained in the block. And another way of looking at it, which then starts, if someone wants to take the quantum physics point of view, which fits much more into God turned into life, right? And time is a consequence in a way. It's not an independent reality. It's a consequence of the creation. And we can look at that, meaning A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D, and D leads to C, leads to B, leads to A, which means if the end is a big catastrophic nuclear explosion, if you look at it as a block, which essentially means take time out of it, it's almost like an author writing a book that writes the last chapter first, and then that last chapter determines the beginning of the book, because they say, okay, this is set, whereas we see time as A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D, which is how I'm describing it, because I'm focusing on the causality of genes and up-to-date conditioning. But if you want to look at it as a block where D leads to C, leads to B, leads to A, and simultaneously A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D, which really means it all happened at once. So that might sit better given the quantum physics. But if you get rid of the pre, or you don't even need to get rid of the pre, I would say that my speaking was predetermined based on my makeup and the circumstance. So what I said was determined by factors that came before. So if someone is happy to go with the causality, and I much prefer running with causality because it is the two sides of the coin, and so they're equally as true. You can't say one is more true than the other. It's a paradox. So even quantum physics, the spontaneous, random quantumness coalesces as the opposite of chaos. And so we can't deny that. So the causality and everything that happens has a causal explanation within the story. Then means, okay, if they're both true, if the creation includes the causal, then that is one perspective that's there. And so you can then, if you want, exclusively focus on explaining things according to that spectrum. And so looking at the predeterminedness of my words based on my genes and up-to-date conditioning is a way of seeing, unless you want to completely annul the relevantness of time, because then the notion that I went to school and learnt English and all of that has to be, dropped. But if we look at life as it presents on a causal level, I speak English because I went to an English-speaking school and grew up in an English-speaking country. Now, someone can say, well, as far as I'm concerned, that's complete assumption. That's where's the school that you went to? It doesn't exist now. show me the school, show me your brain. You tell me that, you think because of your genetics. Show me the proof of that you have a brain. So I don't buy that argument. I buy that argument or that teaching style as a very valid teaching style to bring someone's attention away from conceptuality of past and future into the present, and to see, actually, if I'm really present with the present moment, thoughts pop out of nowhere. Now, that's not the truth necessarily. That's about bringing an awareness of life from a very specific perspective, and it can deliver a lot of fruit. But so anyway, my point being, predetermination can be seen really simply as I'm speaking this way because of factors that came before the speech.
I don't want to take up all the time. Thank you.
Beth and
Time doesn't exist.
Sorry. Don't worry, time doesn't exist.
Hi. My question is, you talk about God's will and my will.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering, is there a discernment or choice made between God's will and my will? And if so, what does that? Does that make sense?
No,
Oh, really?
but we'll make it
I'm
make
just,
sense.
it says God's will and my will.
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference?
Well, when we investigate it, we find there is no difference, because how God's will unfolds is through each of us exercising what we can call our own free will.
Yeah.
But we have to be very clear on how we define these words, because if we just say, oh, great, I have free will, and then we apply our definition of free will from a year ago or 10 years ago, then we might miss the point. So what it's saying is that our free will is a sense in the moment, a feeling in the moment. The feeling of free will. I have a feeling. So I would say that my belief in personal doership on an attitudinal level has been completely annihilated because for 20 years I've been looking at, in each moment, everything that's been happening through me from the perspective of, this is a result of the functioning of this biological and psychological organism that has consciousness functioning through it. And I didn't put any of it in place. I am a result of all of that. And as I look at it over and over again, it just means that I simply can't see the other and myself as independent from this movement of life. And we are essentially extrusions of life. So the belief in personal doership, I would say, is completely obliterated. But the belief in personal doership doesn't obliterate my sense of free will.
Okay.
It doesn't obliterate the feeling that I have in the moment that it thankfully is there. I say it's a gift from God. The feeling that whatever I do is my free will, so I don't feel like a slave. I don't feel like a puppet at the end of a string, but I am, from one perspective. So God has given me the gift of free will, which means the feeling of free will.
Where does God's will come in? Because if people think, I'll discern what God's will is as opposed to my will. So
yeah, so God's will is means God, life's will, and I'm saying that I am a result of life. I've never been separated from it. Life didn't spit me out, right? And then say, okay, now you're on your own, in a sense. Like the dream character in a dream can't exit the dream and have an existence outside of the dream. Yeah. And similarly, if we look at life, I sperm and egg came together, and then this organism started to grow, and then at some point it was expelled out of the oven, and it continued to grow. And it continued to grow according to life, according to the blueprint. So I didn't suddenly become independent of life. And I continued to be impacted on a conditioning level. And the conditioning continues moment after moment until the day we die. And I continually morph and grow stronger and then grow weaker as I get older or whatever it is. More intelligence, then that intelligence can start to fail in some people, or we could keep getting more and more intelligent because we've got more and more information until we die. But effectively, I'm never independent. I've never become a separate entity, separate from life. So whatever I do is life's will. Meaning whatever I do is determined by factors life is in control of, not I'm in control of. So I am an expression of life. You are an expression of life. Everyone is an expression of life. Everyone is not separate from life and functioning according to life's design. So that's what it means. Everything is God's will. Everything is life's will. Means so there isn't a discernment that says, oh, that's God's will and that's my will. Everything is God's will.
What do you mean by my will then? What's your definition of my will?
Well, it's a feeling, simply a feeling in the moment that feels like I'm not a slave. Feels like...
My will. That's your definition of my will.
Yeah, which is... so that's why we have to be very clear on it. It isn't the will of a separate independent entity. But in practice, you say, well, I chose to do that. And it feels like, well, and you did. There is an entity that chose, but the choosing was dependent on factors it didn't control. So the choice really, the choice that you say is your control, in your control, is much less in your control when we investigate it clearly than the thinking mind thinks. The thinking mind has basically done a very rudimentary assessment of life, got it wrong, and said, oh, I'm separate from life and I'm in control. And then it goes round with an attitude of saying, you should have done something different. I don't like what you did. Why did you do it? That thinking is completely redundant when we see that that person couldn't possibly act differently. So when we say, you should have acted differently, it's like me looking at the toaster and saying to the toaster, why didn't you wash the dishes? You know, but we don't do that because we get to we understand on that level that the toaster is designed to toast and not to wash dishes. Then when we see another human being that's designed to get angry in a situation, and we say, you shouldn't get angry. Exactly the same as telling the toaster to wash the dishes.
Sir, you are saying that if an event happens and if we carry over, we are going wrong, and if we don't carry over, we are going right.
No, I said it's inevitable that we will carry over if we're designed to carry over. You can't help it, right? But relative to peace of mind, carrying it over is an obstacle to peace of mind.
So if we carry over, it's not our fault and we were designed.
Exactly.
That's strange.
I would say it's the basis of acceptance, because the opposite is to condemn yourself for what you did, which is hatred for oneself, uncomfortableness with yourself until that condemnation falls away. And then when it falls away, you're at peace again. Right? So these are just descriptions. And the aim of the descriptions, hopefully, is for us to investigate them and say, I don't want to believe this. I want to see if it's an accurate description. So when you leave, you might find that someone does something or you do something that delivers a negative outcome, and then you might see the attitudinal blame towards yourself in the form of guilt and shame, or blame towards the other, and you might be able to register it as a disturbance of your peace of mind. And then when that subsides, you might realize, what a relief, I don't feel the same way as I was feeling when I was blaming them. So then you can put a tick next to it and say, blame towards the other, blame towards myself for the way I functioned, the way the other functioned, is a disturbance to my peace of mind. That can be a conclusion based on your own investigation of your own life experience. And the pointers, the descriptions I'm putting, say that, but really they're just there to hopefully motivate or be the seed of a seeing of our internal landscape and an external circumstance that we didn't look at with these eyes. Once we recognize that the blame is a disturbance to my peace of mind, blaming the other is a disturbance to my peace of mind, blaming myself is a disturbance. So once we've registered that, then we say, on what basis is the blame happening? What is the rationale, the logic? What is the attitude towards life that allows the blame to happen? And you'll see in the story of the blame, why did you do this? Why would you act like that? It showed me no respect. So your story will be, and how can I exact revenge on that person? How can I hurt them back? So you can see in it that there is hatred towards the other. You want to get them back for the pain they delivered. And there is the assumption that they could have acted differently. So you say, my story says they hurt me, and I take that as a personal attack, so I hate them. And I'm saying in this narrative that they shouldn't have done it. Which, when you look at it, you see, wow, there is in this blame the attitude towards life that I'm describing as the attitude of attachment to outcome, meaning I feel like my completeness is to be found in what the other delivers to me, pleasure or pain.
Right.
And I have the attitude of seeing the other as someone who is in control of what they do.
Right. Oh, one last question. Do you have any fear in life?
Yes, if a tiger was in front of me, I would be very scared.
That's future, but right now, day-to-day living, do you have any fear or hope in life?
Right now, no.
No. Okay, thanks.
But yesterday, when the monkey was snarling at me, there was fear. So what I'm trying to make the point, if you say now, like you say that was future, if I talk about a tiger, that's future.
Not physical attack fear, but fear of insult or fear of death.
No.
No, okay, thanks.
No. But biological fear is a different thing to psychological fear, yeah?
Yes, exactly.
Death will be the end of any problems, including tiger problems.
Raja, thanks for being here.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Before I go to the question, are you writing a book and when is it going to be published?
I think you asked last year.
Yeah.
I would like to write a book, but it hasn't happened. I've been wanting to do that for the last 10 or 11 years. And each year I sit down and say, and then nothing happens. So destiny is such.
Okay, the question is, am I speaking to now a zero free will, totally impotent robot? Yes or no? I mean, when I mean you, I mean the entire human.
That's the theory.
No, as of now, is it a yes or no? Because over periods of time, 10,000 years of human history, science at the quantum level, Newtonian level, teachers, Nisargadatta, I am Brahman, but he's like that, 6-footer or 5-footer. There's been a lot of confusion. And amongst the new wave of Neo-Advaita teachers, like after Tony Parson, you are the most intellectually probing, like a neurosurgeon, into the psychosurgery of the human psyche. And I want yes or no answers. Are you a robot, yes or no? A biological robot.
So,
because the computers are silica based and we are carbon based.
Yeah, I have to make a look. If you want one word.
One word, tick box, yes or no?
Yeah, if you want one word to substitute for life, the word is paradox. Right? And you now want me to describe life as yes or no. So actually, if I say life can be exchanged for the word paradox, my answer has to be yes and no.
No, I'm not talking about life. I'm talking to you directly. I'm seeing somebody in front of me, and this person has taught me that there is no free will.
No, this person has told you in each moment.
There is an apparent free will.
Or all of life from the beginning of
Yes.
time to the end of time is predetermined.
Which means there is no free will. Why are we cutting into the semantics of English? Because English, especially British English, is very, very confusing, uncommonly common. Sanity is uncommonly common in humanity. Why can't you say rare? You see in our textbooks, uncommonly common symptom of, influenza. The language is very difficult, and in human life, coming in English, I want from a teacher to tell me yes or no. Enough of the discussions. 10,000 years from Mahabharata, Vedas, Upanishads, Adi Shankara, Buddha, Mahavir, Tony Parson, Osho, J.K., Roger.
Yeah. So, but that's like saying.
But even from your teaching, I've taken it as there is no free will. Whatever is happening is because of my conditioning, my genetics, my etc., etc. But what is coming out is not due to this 100 trillion cell biological instrument. It's being done by life. The metaphor in your website and your teaching is being lived.
Mm.
So what I wanted to ask you was, what am I being lived with? It's a force, something unknown. It's a mystery. What is it?
But the thing is,
I am a robot.
Something
is running this program. It's a beautiful, Bill Gates and the other guy, iPhone guy. They got together and did the industry up in the last 20, 30 years. Like this infinite source is running me. That's the being lived.
Mm-hmm.
So I am a robot. There may be a feeling of a free will that I am doing this, but that's also ingrained in the moment software writing in my hardware.
Yeah. So, does suffering arise for you?
Oh, yeah.
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 So
pleasure comes, pain comes, suffering comes.
No, hold on. Pleasure and pain, inevitable, part of the flow of life.
Yeah.
Can't do anything about it. Life is always going to be a mix of pleasure and pain. Right? The question then is about our attitude to the flow of life. Right? So, in your attitude to the flow of life, does suffering arise?
Yeah, it arises, but it has reduced a lot after listening to the teachings.
Yes. So, if suffering still arises, it means there's some misunderstanding in the system. Right?
Whose system? Is it my system or the system?
Your system.
No, I don't have a system.
Ilango.
No, I came from a sperm of my father on which I never had control. Probably he never had control, and the egg of my mother. Uh-huh. And I'm a product of that. I didn't choose. I wanted a iPad or I wanted a Macintosh. I didn't choose it. Every cell in my body is not mine. It's a fact.
Yeah. So I'm talking about that cellular structure as the system.
Yes, the cellular structure is the hardware, and the psychological energy coming out is from that hardware.
Yes, so the result
it's destined according to the hardware.
And how the hardware was conditioned. So the hardware and the software that was put onto it, right?
Was not mine.
No. So
at any point in life.
So the speaking is happening.
Happening.
Yeah? Not your doing.
No.
Just a happening.
Happening.
My speaking is a happening.
Happening. That's why the question came, are you a robot or not? The answer is yes.
So if I...
You teach you're a robot, but then when I ask you a question, you go into quantum physics.
Because... No.
But you are a voter. You are a voter of Newtonian physics. You push the Newtonian button. But when I ask you a direct question, you go into the paradox, the cat paradox, Schrodinger's cat.
Because the fact is in life, the quantum and the mechanical are there. That's the paradox.
I want you as a teacher to clarify this doubt of the student, because the scientists are not doing it. They're making a bad work out of it.
Okay, but you see...
And very few teachers are talking about quantum physics in a logical sense.
Yeah.
So I want an answer from you. Okay. Which is correct? Is it quantum physics or Newtonian? If you answer that, this answer is ready.
How can it's like saying what's on the coin, the queen's head or
both are there. Depends on how you toss it before a cricket match.
Sign. No, whether you toss it or not, they're both there.
Both are there.
Yeah.
But at any point in time, when you put it down, one side is up. If you look at it like that, it's You will see both. Like you can see this way or that way.
Yeah, so you can't reduce the coin to one side.
The coin has two sides.
So yes, so you can't say,
what are you
okay, it
saying
has two sides, but tell me which side is real.
Yeah,
That's
I'm
what
asking
you're
you the
saying.
question. Which is real? Is it quantum? Is it that my body is made up of zillions of electrons? It's the truth.
They're both. They work. They coexist. Quantum manifests as mechanical.
Yeah, but when I, as Ilango, speak, I speak at the Newtonian level. I don't speak at the electron level.
so-
The electron doesn't have a voice.
So which
Zillions of electrons, protons, neutrons combine to produce a Newtonian structure here, which asks you a question: am I a robot? You don't go to the electron and talk. The electron in Roger is not talking to the electron in Ilango. Now, it's the combination of everything talking, which is Newtonian.
Okay, so we stick to the Newtonian level.
I know, not the we. You, as a teacher, tell me
Yeah,
what.
so-
My question is from a student.
Okay, but
I take the role of a student here in this drama.
Okay, so let me talk.
Yeah.
The problem with concepts is that humans don't have a very good critical thinking structure, right? We don't know how to think properly. So if I give you an answer, what happens is our poor thinking structure gets applied to the answer and messes the answer up, right? So really, we need to be taught how to think, not what to think. If we learn how to think, then we'll think well, then we can get given information and we'll work well with it, right? So if I'm going to give a yes and no answer, first I need to make some qualifications, right? First thing is, everything that is said in this teaching as descriptions, they're concepts, right? And there is the concept in the teaching that's very important. Is whatever I say is a concept, whatever anyone else has ever said is a concept, and it isn't the truth. Now, a critical thinking assessment will understand, good, concepts which are relative in nature can't describe what is, because if there is a truth, the only truth is what is, which isn't some spiritual thing. It means that what is so vast, right, that I would have to describe every leaf on every tree in exactly its position in any moment to give you the truth. I can't do it in a concept, right? If we look at a cylindrical tank, from one perspective, it's a rectangle, straight on. From up top, it's a circle. And I can describe the circle, and it's a relatively accurate perspective, right? But from another perspective, it's not accurate. So we have to first understand, part of our critical thinking needs to say understand the concepts are not truth. So if a question says, tell me definitively, absolutely, is the tank a circle or is it a rectangle? We can't do that. That's the critical thinking error being applied to the question, right? So I can give you some specific answers, but first I have to qualify them as being relative answers that I say are relatively accurate in relation to a particular benchmark, a particular objective. So the teaching is about a very specific topic. Happiness for the human being in daily living, and happiness is the end of suffering. That's also enlightenment, the topic. Buddha says enlightenment is the end of suffering. So the topic is peace of mind in daily living. Peace of mind, the absence of suffering, right? So all of these ways of saying it are interchangeable ways. Now, relative to that, certain descriptions will be given. Those descriptions are not relative to the reality of life. I'm not putting forward a description that I then want a physicist to assess relative to quantum understanding, for example. I'm not talking about quantum understanding. I'm talking about peace of mind in daily living, right? So if we take the statements I'm putting forward and assess them relative to another benchmark, they're going to be wrong, because these are specifically structured to deal with an issue. And the issue is the issue of the psychological thinking, which in this teaching is called the thinking mind, that turns into suffering, right? And so an understanding of that is an understanding that the thinking sees life as not one big happening according to life, which it is. The unfold, the movement of Jupiter and Mars and the sun and the growing of the trees is all part of this amazing unfolding of life, right? And the human being, with its limited thinking, just doesn't see that because of the way that life has been experienced, like the way all of the stimuli come in, and the brain constructs a model of best fit based on the stimuli that comes in, creates a model of best fit, and included in the model of best fit is its conclusions, its deeply ingrained beliefs, right? And so the teachings are trying to insert new information into the system so that the model of best fit changes, right? And so if we look at the suffering and we see it's based on the deeply ingrained belief of personal doership, the teaching needs to address that. And so the teaching, not as some absolute truth, right, will say what the human being is essentially a biological instrument made up of genes and up-to-date conditioning through which consciousness functions, and the combination of the biological instrument and consciousness is the human being. So, am I a biological robot, a biological instrument? I am a biological instrument through which consciousness is functioning as Roger. Yes.
The instrument has no free will.
That instrument
Does it have a free will?
functions like any other instrument in life, according to its design.
No, for example, this computer doesn't have a free will.
It didn't design itself.
Even you have not designed yourself.
That's right. So I will function in the same way as the computer.
So the computer has no free will and Roger has no free will.
Well, as I said, when I'm talking about how I feel about the decisions that happen according to my design, right? So any decision I make in life, what to order off the menu, is a result of my design. But when I look at the experience as a whole, I have to include the level of feeling. I can't just live in theory. And on the level of feeling, so this is the paradox, I can't deny that there is a feeling of free will, irrespective or nonetheless that I am a robot, a biological instrument, and so I have to include that in my model of life. If I'm going to put a description forward to people, I don't want it to be a description that leaves out a very essential part of life, which is the practical living of life. So we have what we can call free will as a feeling, but what I'm calling free will doesn't negate the fact that I am a complex biological and psychological instrument designed not by the instrument itself, but by life and functioning that way. So if we think that predetermination and free will are contradictions, we're making an error. It's a very easy error to make. I made it with Ramesh. I just couldn't understand why he would say everything is completely predetermined, which I had no issue before I met him. I would completely agree with that. And then I'm sitting in Satsang and he said, and in the moment, you have complete free will to do whatever you think or feel to do. And I said, what are you talking about?
I feel the same. So
yeah. And at one point, because I was thinking about it, because something deep inside knew he was right, because he was always right. Right? So whenever I'd argue with him, there was always a part of me that says, but he's probably right. Right? So he was insisting on this point. So I would say, we have apparent free will. And he'd sort of, yeah, okay, you can say apparent free will. But he wasn't really happy with using the word apparent free will. And I could feel it. So I'm saying, really, what he's saying is we have free will in the moment to do exactly what... And it was only because my thinking was so insistent on seeing life as predetermined, which I had, was a great relief, a great freedom, that I had become obsessed with one side of the coin, a side of the coin that I had to see, that needed to be seen. It's part of the puzzle. It needs to be seen. But then, if we don't see the fact that there is a feeling in any moment that you can do whatever you can stand up, you can order this, you can order that, you're not shackled by chains. Although the theory says you are shackled, the theory is correct. The theory says you are limited to function according to your design. But the fact you are limited doesn't change the fact that in the moment you feel like that's what you want to do. You don't feel limited.
Feeling is different from reality.
Yes, so you know you are limited, but you don't feel like you're limited, right? And so I was so obsessed with the fact that we are limited, which is theoretically correct, right? And theoretically it isn't a diminishment of that. It's in theory we are limited. There's no arguing that. In practice, the feeling doesn't tell us we're limited, but we know we are, right? And so if we become obsessed with one side and you keep going, I have no free will. I have no free will. I am a robot. I am a result of my genes, and up to all of that's correct. All of that has to be the thing. We're holding on to those concepts too tightly, and then a living on another level doesn't coexist with that understanding, and it means that there isn't an integration. So yesterday in the Facebook group, there was a lady that posted something and said, "Hey ladies, be careful. I was walking in this part or driving in this part of town, and someone stopped me, a man, and his intentions didn't seem good. So this is a warning." And in one of the comments, someone started spouting non-duality theory about, there's no outside, everything is happening inside. And then he went again with another thing, with the Ramana quote that I mentioned, but only half parts of it, that whatever is destined to happen is bound to happen. You can't stop it, and what is not meant to happen won't happen. And you can see that is someone who is relating to the theory in a completely one-sided way, where it makes them impotent, actually. So what this lady was doing is putting a warning out, that when the warning goes out, that is part of destiny. And so that was destined to happen, and the effect of that warning may well be to get a lady that in theory would have gone down that road at night, to not go down that road at night. And so it was destined for the second lady not to go down the road at night, because it was destined for the first lady to put the warning on Facebook. Whereas the comment from this man was, this is a completely pointless post, everything is going to happen according to God's will, which is a complete misunderstanding of what God's will actually means in a dynamic sense, because there's an obsession with a theory that doesn't allow the mind to see it holistically. So, in conclusion, the free will I'm talking about doesn't negate the theory that we are limited in a very specific limitation. In each moment we can only function one way, the way we function, and that is God's will. The outcomes are God's will. But in practice we feel, thankfully, that it's my will. So if you can know both at the same time, you will live saying, wow, I'm free to order this or that off the menu, knowing that I can't really make a mistake in relation to what happens.
Just correct me if I'm wrong. Ramesh said, no, there is no free will, but every moment act as if there is a free will to keep, the life interesting. I mean, if
not to keep life interesting, because you have no other choice.
You have no other choice, which means there is zero choice. The reason why I'm talking about this frequently is a new wave of teachers now are hitting hard and there is no free will.
Because there's such an ingrained belief in personal doership. So they have to. There has to be a way to undo that. It's not the truth. It's a methodology to uproot the deeply ingrained misunderstanding.
So are you still insisting that you do have a free will? You? So for example, you can't hear music through your eyes. You're limited. Your eyes will only see. They cannot hear music. Your ears cannot see. These are all limitations at the outer level. Every cell in the body has its limitations. The mitochondria, the nucleus.
So why are you still suffering?
Me, that's the destiny part.
Yeah, but you see, you have to understand that there must be a misunderstanding in your notion of no free will.
The suffering has come down after I have ingrained myself into there is no free will.
Yeah.
The me is collapsing a lot.
Very good.
But before that, it was not doing it. That's why I was trying to,
So that's why the teachers keep telling you there's no free will.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking you again, is there a free will?
No, no free will.
Okay. That cuts up, because even Raman Maharishi, it was like guru and disciple, you do this, this will happen.
Yeah.
You Nisarga Datta, you understand. But only from after Ramesh and you, the new wave of teachers, are saying there is no you, there is no I, there is just a teaching. Which just removes the pedestal of non-doership.
That's right.
And this no free will has helped me a lot in crashing the me inside me. So I just thought I will concretize this question repeatedly. So that
very good. So if suffering ever arises based on the idea it's they're doing or you're doing, remember there's no free will. Yeah.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
So can we do one more question today?
It's yes.
It is urgent.
Okay, then let's do it.
Yeah, namaste, sir. Sir?
Is the green light on?
Yes, yes.
No, just speak loud.
Sir, deceit, betrayal, disloyalty, wrong, immorality. If this, not if this has been done to me by my most loved ones. And because of this, I have feelings of agony and devastation and shattering. And because of this, in me there is rage, anger, and vengeance, malice, hatred. But because they are my most loved ones, I do not want to hurt them. So I want to continue loving them, but I'm not being able to do this. So then there is shame and lack. So how can I continue loving them?
You can't.
If it's sir, if it's my if one of those most loved ones is my real sister and I have only one real sister, then I think that if I cannot continue loving her, then it means I have lost the only sister I had.
So the only thing that can happen in life is what happens, right? Tomorrow you might find yourself capable of loving her, right? Again, despite what has happened, what events, what pain she delivered. But if you find yourself unable to love her because there is a vengeance and a hatred towards her, that's what is there. And if there is an expectation, which is what you just described, I have an expectation to love her, and yet I am not loving her. And now I am feeling shame. You'll find the shame is there because of the expectation and the failure to meet the expectation. So what is happening at the moment is there is hatred because of the pain that was delivered to you, right? And it's destiny for you to have an expectation that that hatred not be there, that love be there instead. And then it's destiny, because of that expectation, for shame to be there. Right? So pain was delivered to you. Attachment to pain, or attachment to outcomes, and outcomes are either pleasure or pain. Right? So when we say attachment to outcomes, what I really mean is attachment to pleasure or pain. Circumstance is a series of outcomes. Circumstance is always outcomes. So I'll start from this circumstance. Circumstance is outcomes. Outcomes are either pleasure or pain. So you found yourself in a circumstance where your sister delivered pain to you. Because there is an attachment to outcome in the system. Attachment to outcome means a belief that my completeness, myself, is dependent on there being pleasure and not pain. Right? Because that's in the system, a hatred towards the person that delivered pain arises. Now, you didn't put the attachment to outcome in place. Don't feel guilty about that. Right? That's a default human condition based on how life shapes us and all of the way that circumstance is interpreted. So that gets put in place for humanity. Humanity is moving around with this deeply ingrained belief in personal doership. So you are forced to hate her. You don't have an option. It would be nice if things were different. It would be nice if she didn't deliver pain in the first place. It would be nice if, okay, pain was inevitable. It would be nice that I don't have attachment to outcome. Right? These would be better, you could say, relative to pleasurable or peacefulness. But the fact is that's not how it is. So you can say, theoretically, it would be nice if she delivered pleasure instead of pain. It would be nice that I don't have attachment to outcome, because then I wouldn't hate her. But the fact is that they're in place. So each of those things happen. Then on top of that, there is an expectation that you don't hate her. Right? Another layer of attachment to outcomes. Right? That's inevitable because the attachment to outcome is in there. And then the shame is there because you're not meeting your expectation. The advice that I give is you can't do it differently, because everything that is happening is a happening according to God's will, according to life, not your doing. You know, you're not failing at this, you're functioning. So if anywhere in the series of feelings that you have described, the thought can arise, this is destiny. This is life that is out of my control happening. If that arises, there can be a softening of the suffering, and there's several layers of suffering here. So I wouldn't set any expectation for any of the suffering to change, but hopefully there can be an attitude that says, however it is destiny in this moment. It is my destiny to receive the pain. It is my destiny to feel the hatred. It is my destiny to have the expectation. It is my destiny to feel the shame. Because of the way she was designed and the way I am designed. And be kind to yourself. But I'm not even telling you to be kind, because you can't be unless it happens. But the realization this is a happening can be the beginning of the kindness.
Yes, okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.